All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a daily Power Parsha. This is our daily journey into the Torah reading. So this week's Torah portion is Tazria, and a big focus is on the laws of Tzaraat, this spiritual form of leprosy or this biblical leprosy type thing that had a spiritual cause to it. It wasn't a physical ailment as much as it was a spiritual result of a spiritual malady. All right, so I think we are ready to jump into the text. I'm going to pull it up on my end and share it with you. We're going to start from reading number 2, as we only got through the first reading yesterday, so we have a lot to talk about. Look at that, Chabad.org loading up ads for us. Super cool. Okay, here we go. All right, Tazria, reading to Leviticus chapter 13. Oh, you know what? We need to pull it up from the end of the first reading because we got to get a running start here. The Torah talks about different types of skin markings or skin. I don't know what the right word is. Skin ailments, and it talks about different types of images. When I say images, different types of appearances. And I said yesterday that this Chumash, the Gunnak edition, has a nice translation here that we can use. So he says like this: if a man has on his skin a white blotch, a creamy blotch, or a bright spot, those are se'et, sapachat, and baheret. Okay, so then there's 2 options. Well, there's really 3 options, but the Torah talks about 2. So number 1, where it's clear cut, tzaraat. It's like, yeah, that is absolutely, you got it. You have officially been diagnosed as tzaraat positive. You got it. You got a positive result. In that case, that's verse 3. When the Cohen sees this, he shall pronounce him unclean. Based on certain signs, if that's what the Cohen sees, then he's done. He's fit. In other words, impure. He's got it. He's contracted it. However, if it's a white baheret, right, which is translated as white spot on the skin, and its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, in that case, it might be tzaraat, it might not be. It's pending further evaluation. So then the Cohen quarantines this person for 7 days, basically says, okay, you don't go anywhere. In 7 days, I need to come back and examine you. Stay put. Don't run too far. The 7th day, he comes back to see him, right? Cohen makes a house visit, or he visits the Cohen, whatever it is. The Cohen checks it out, and behold, if it's the same, if it's remained the same in its appearance, it hasn't spread, the color hasn't changed, etc., then a second quarantine happens, another 7 days. Why? Because we still need to know what's going on here. It's still not clear cut. If it's clear cut, it's tzaraat. If it's not clear cut, all right, we did 1 quarantine, nothing changed, a second quarantine, let's continue. This is where we start today. And the Cohen shall see him on the 7th day. This is Leviticus chapter 13, verse 6. The Cohen shall see him on the 7th day a second time, right? Really a 3rd time, right? Because there was the initial examination, then the first 7-day period for the second, at the end of the second, now the second 7-day period with the 3rd examination. And behold, the lesion has become dimmer, and the lesion has not spread on the skin. So then the Cohen shall pronounce him clean. So in other words, if after 14 days of quarantine, it's actually receding, it's getting lighter, or it's getting dimmer, it's getting less pronounced, and it hasn't spread on the skin, at that point, after 14 days from the original examination, if it hasn't grown, if it's only gotten smaller, good, clean, kosher. You don't have it. You're negative. It is a mispachat. What's mispachat? Mispachat is translated here in this Chumash as, give me a second, it's merely a discoloration. It's merely a discoloration of the skin. It's not actually tzaraat. That does not cause impurity, does not cause a person to need to go through the whole ritual, right? But since the person was quarantined, as Rashi points out, he shall immerse his garments and become clean, even though he didn't officially become impure. With Tzarat, since it was suspected and he was quarantined, he still should go to mikvah and become pure. However, if the mispachat, that skin discoloration, spreads on the skin after it has been shown to the Cohen for his purification, if subsequently it spreads on the skin, it shall be shown to the Cohen a second time. The Cohen shall look at it, and behold, in verse 8, the mispachat has spread on the skin. The Cohen shall pronounce him unclean. It is tzarat. So again, the two words here that we can learn today are mispachat. Well, tzarat, we know. The one word we can learn is mispachat. Mispachat means that it is a suspected tzarat lesion, but one that is ultimately benign. Yes, it's something, but it's not actually tzarat. And how do we know this? Because it hasn't spread, the color is becoming dimmer. So yes, the person there still is a mikveh involved, but it's not an elaborate tzarat process that requires, as we'll see, a whole bunch of stuff happen. Okay, it's not considered to be. Now, the question might be, so then why do you need to do anything? If it's not tzarat, then live your life. You're negative. You're good. Well, it's not so simple. There was something. He was quarantined, either for 7 days or another 7 days. There was a suspicion. So it means kind of like there's still a little bit of, there was a little bit of suspicion. Therefore, let's go to mikvah. Not let's, but the person should go to mikvah and then be clean. All right, let's continue. Verse number 9. Now we're talking about the laws of the white blotch. If a man has a lesion of tzarat, okay? In other words, a suspected lesion. We don't know. He's got something. Maybe it's tzarat, maybe it's not. So he shall be brought to the Cohen. See, he's brought to the Cohen. The Cohen doesn't make house visits. He visits the Cohen. The Cohen shall look at it. And behold, there is a white se'et on the skin. Se'et means white blotch. White blotch on the skin. And either it has turned the hair white, or there is healthy live flesh in the se'et. Okay? Healthy live skin within the blotch. So in that case, the Torah says, it is old tzarat on the skin of his flesh. Yeah, this is, why'd you only show up now, the Kohen might say. Looks like you had this for a little while, based on the growth pattern over here. And the Kohen shall pronounce him, you guessed it, unclean. It's legitimately tzarat. He need not quarantine him because he is unclean. In other words, you don't have to quarantine him there's two types of quarantining. One quarantine is where you actually banish the person outside the camp because he has tzarat, but that's not what we're talking about here. So this quarantine means the pending examination. Like, let's wait 7 days and then examine you again. He doesn't need to do that because it's 100% tzarat. No need, no question at all. Okay, next verse. Now, what about if the tzarat covers the entire skin? And if the tzarat has spread over his skin, whereby the tzarat covers all the skin of the person with the lesion, from his head to his feet, wherever the eyes of the Cohen can see it. Imagine, head to toe covered with this white blotch spot, creamy thing, whatever it is. The whole head to toe covered with tzarat. Then the Cohen shall look at it. Once again, it always requires a Cohen, which we'll speak about today. Why? And behold, the tzarat has covered his flesh. Yeah, that's what he ascertains with his expert eye. You're covered with it. So look at this. Look at the old reverse psychology. He shall pronounce the person with the lesion clean. He's pure. He's clean. Unbelievable. You have a little blotch. You're impure. The whole skin is covered. You're fine. Unbelievable plot twist. Unbelievable. Right? Why? Because he's turned completely white. He's clean. He's clean because he's turned completely white. And it doesn't make any sense. right? I've seen insights like this, that when it's a little spot, we have to make a big deal about it. So the person wakes up and realizes you got to change. But if it covers the whole skin, the person already realizes they got to take action. You don't need a whole ritual. Are you with me on this? In other words, the whole tzarat was a wake-up call. Like, hey, buddy, have you been gossiping? Right? It's like, Pinocchio with the nose, right? Pinocchio, every time he lies, like his nose grows bigger. So like every time you say Lashon Hara, boom, right? The skin turns colors. So if it's a small spot, a person might be tempted to ignore it. So we say, no, you can't ignore it. You have to be banished outside the camp, and it's 7 days and whatever it is. It's like a whole process. And then you have to bring offerings and sacrifices and make a whole big deal about it so the person like wakes up and gets it. But if the whole skin turns white, the whole skin, we don't need to do anything. They already got it. They got the message. They got to clean up their act. They got that message. That's one insight. In other words, it's easier to brush something under the carpet when it's small. If it's a massive issue, then the person is forced to take care of it on their own. In which case, halacha says you're fine, because we know you're going to take care of it anyway. I mean, you can't ignore it. It's so obvious. Again, the subtle things are the more dangerous. The subtle stumbling blocks, right? What's more dangerous? An obvious step or the stage of Chabad in Jeff's place, right? If you've been there to Jeff's place, you know what I'm talking about. That little stage thing. It's like the floor, and then it goes up a little bit to form a stage. Everyone trips over that thing, right? We even painted it in yellow at the corner over there, right? Everyone trips over it. Why? Because it's so subtle. A big step, you'll notice that you're not going to trip over it. A little step, so the smaller it is, the more dangerous it is. Same thing with tzarat. The smaller the lesion, the more dangerous it is, and the more care we have to take in order to make sure that it doesn't trip up the person. Okay, now let's get back inside. However, Torah continues, verse 14, but on the day that live flesh appears in it, he shall become unclean. If at any point in time, the full-bodied tzarat person develops live flesh, that's like healthy flesh, inside in any area of the body, then that renders the person unclean. When the Cohen sees the healthy live flesh, he shall pronounce him unclean. Right, healthy live flesh inside a lesion, that's the sign of tzarat. The live flesh is unclean, it is tzarat. But if the healthy live flesh once again turns white, he shall come to the Cohen, and the Cohen shall look at it, and behold, the lesion has turned white. The Cohen shall pronounce the lesion clean. He is clean. So it's interesting. It sounds a little paradoxical. The white spot, the white blotch, is really only tzarat if it also has the appearance of live flesh inside of it. If it's fully white, if the whole person is white, then it's actually, again, paradoxically, not tzarat. Okay, that takes us to the end of the reading. Let's go back and do a little Rashi. Let's see what Rashi has in store for us today. Dimmer. Okay, the name of a clean lesion. Yeah, mispachat is a clean lesion. It's just a skin ailment. Yeah, and Rashi clarifies, since if it's clean, if it's just a mispachat, why does he need to immerse his garments and then become clean? Rashi says, since he was required to be quarantined, he's considered unclean and requires immersion. He's got to go to the mikveh since he was quarantined. Even though it was only suspicion, it turned out not to be a big deal. He still got to go to mikveh after that ordeal. Okay. So as soon as Rashi says, when in a case where it's clear cut and the Cohen pronounced him clean, Rashi says, as soon as the Cohen is pronounced him unclean, he's then definitely unclean. And when he is healed, he requires the bird offering, shaving of the hair, and bring the sacrifice specified in the section commencing Zot Tia Torah Samatzora, which is next week's Torah portion. Mispachat, i.e. this mispachat is tzarat. It's not mispachat, it's actually tzarat. Tzarat. Okay, we're going to get to grammar, masculine, feminine. We're going to skip that. Here we go. What's the healthy flesh? Rashi says it means that part of the white in the se'et lesion reverts to appear like healthy flesh. This is also a sign of uncleanness, of impurity. Hence, a sign of uncleanness is either white hair without healthy flesh, or an area of normal flesh even without white hair. So those are the two. Basically, the two signs are you have the white skin, the white patch or blotch of skin, and then either hair inside it, white hair inside it, or healthy flesh inside of it. Okay, it is an old tzara'at, it is an old lesion which is under the area of normal skin. The wound appears healthy on the surface, but it's full of fluid underneath, so that one should not say, since healthy skin has appeared, I shall pronounce it clean. So there are signs that it's an old tzara'at that has not yet been diagnosed. Interesting. From his head down to his feet, whatever the eyes of the Cohen can see it, Rashi says, this phrase comes to exclude a Cohen whose eyesight is dimmed. A Cohen with one blind eye or with impaired vision in both eyes may not pronounce the status of lesions because I guess he can't see it. It's kind of obvious. Okay, although I'm going to share something else that's going to be fascinating. I think fascinating soon. Okay. That one is too detailed for me right now. Interesting. From the middle of this Rashi, the bottom line lesson is here. From here, we learn that a bridegroom is exempt from having a lesion examined throughout all 7 days of the wedding feast, from himself, his garments, in his house. Someone who just got married and newlywed, don't examine. The Cohen should not examine him. Don't want to ruin the party in case he has Saras. Similarly, during a festival, people are exempt from having the lesion examined throughout all the days of the festival. Don't want to ruin the holiday spirits. Okay, I want to point out something right here. It doesn't necessarily fit right here specifically, but it fits in the entire conversation, i.e. here and also other places. And that is, after much introduction, that is the following, that they're part of the Tzarat experience that the Torah emphasizes multiple times is the need to have this examined by a Cohen. Halacha says, although Rashi just talked about a Cohen whose eyesight is dimmed or who's blind on one eye or who can't see well, the law is like this. It must be examined by a Cohen. If the only Cohen in town is a child who does not have the know-how, does not have the training to be able to identify based on the color and the size and the shape and the hairs and did it grow, did it shrink, did it stay the same size? A child does not have this training, right? But the person doesn't know. So halacha says like this. Listen to this. You show it to the child. Let's say the only Cohen in the town is a child. You show it to the child, along with an expert, someone who's a scholar, who even though he's not a Cohen, he knows the laws. The scholar then tells the Cohen, the kid, what to say, what to pronounce, and the Cohen kid pronounces it, pure or impure. Are you with me on this? It has to always be pronounced by a Cohen. The words pure or the words impure have to be uttered by a Cohen, even if the Cohen is a child and has no clue why or what or where or when, right? It has to be uttered by the Cohen. Even though the expert, non-Cohen, is making the ultimate determination, but the expression has to be done by a Cohen. Why? Why do we need a Cohen? So I've shared the theme. I think, I want to say even yesterday we talked about this. A Kohen's whole persona is love. A Cohen is marked as a Cohen, the hallmark, that's what I was looking for. Hallmark of a Cohen is love and care and concern about the other. Caring. We know about Aaron, the high priest. When Aaron passes away, the Torah tells us that everybody mourns for him. The entire people mourned him, men and women, for 30 days. We don't find this by any other person. And our sages tell us why, because he made peace between husbands and wives, between neighbors and friends and acquaintances and business people. He was a peacemaker. He was somebody who was always negotiating peace and peaceful resolutions. That was his deal. So when he passed away, everybody mourned. He wasn't just a teacher. He wasn't just a righteous man or pious individual. He was the peacemaker. That was his gig. That was his deal. Pirkei Avot in Ethics of Avodah says, "Heavy mitamidav shel Aaron, be of the students, the disciples of Aaron. Ohev shalom, love peace. Rodev shalom, pursue peace. Ohev esabrios, love the creations. Mikarvan la Torah, and bring them close to Torah." Aaron, the high priest, Aaron, the high priest, and his descendants, the Kohanim, were all about the love. And thus, they are the only ones qualified to examine the tzarat. Why? Because if a person does have tzarat, you know what happens to them? They're sent outside the camp. They're can you say excommunicated? It's kind of. It's not just quarantined. They are banished. They're cut from the community for about 7 days. They're cut from the community for a certain amount of time. Until the tzarat heals, then plus a certain amount of time. So they're outside. They're banished outside the community. And then they have to go through a whole process and a ritual, a purification that involves birds and sacrifices and shaving the hair. It's a very complicated experience. And it's a difficult experience. And so the Torah is telling us something profound, and that is, before you kick someone out, make sure it's coming from a place of love. That's why only a Cohen is valid to do this, valid to make that pronouncement. Because from anyone else, it might be out of harshness or anger or judgment. From a Cohen, you feel that it's coming from a place of love. That's why even if the Cohen is a kid and doesn't have any idea if it's tzarat or not, the expert tells him, but the child, the Cohen, utters it. Because when words come from a Cohen, you can accept it. When the Cohen says, "I'm sorry, but you got to heal outside the camp," you feel it as a productive journey as opposed to, "We're kicking you out." Right? Like Survivor, you're getting kicked off the island. Yeah, that's harsh. It's not good to hear that. Right? Or The Bachelor, Bachelorette. Yeah. Pick your favorite reality show. So it's not easy to get kicked off the island. You don't get the rose at the rose ceremony. Gewalt, right? It's terrible. Trauma. But when it comes from a Cohen that operates out of love, now you can deal with it. Now you can recognize that's for the good. What's the moral of the story for us? Be a Cohen. Make sure you're a Cohen, right? A metaphorical Cohen. Before you tell someone else something harsh, before you banish, before you discipline, before you say anything that might be construed as harsh or even is harsh, make sure it's only coming from a place of love. That's the moral of the story. Be a Cohen, only a Cohen. And that type of persona is allowed to do the pronouncement of impure. That has to come from a place of love. Once again, a theme that we find recurring throughout Torah, which is never discipline from a place of anger or, irritation or frustration or that sort of thing. This is true in parenting, it's true in relationships, it's true in work relationships, right? Always operate from a place of love and care, and then the person will respond. If it's coming from harshness and judgment, either the person says, "I don't care what you say," because I reject what you're saying, or they're going to say yes, but in their heart, reject what you're saying. Either way, it's not going to work. Okay. Make sense? Yeah? All right. Good. The power of the Kohen. Let's see if we can catch up. All right. That concluded reading number 2. Let's jump into reading 3 for Tuesday. Yeah, it's a short one. Okay. Leviticus chapter 13, verse 18. I mentioned something parenthetically, but I feel like I want to just elaborate on it for 1 second. Back in the day, when tzarat was a thing that would happen, so Kohanim, priests, would have to be trained in all the details of tzarat and identifying, because people would come to them and be like, "Hey, do I have it?" You would have to know based on the color, the size, the shape. Is the skin, does the lesion look deeper or shallower or not deeper than the skin? Like all of these white hairs, darker hairs in the thing, healthy skin inside the white area. All of these details had to be known cold by the Cohen to be able to examine and say, it's fine or not fine, or we got to check this out, come back in 7 days. The Cohen had to know this. You had to be proficient in these laws. No different than a Rav today, who's proficient in an area of Jewish law. The question is, hey, is this kosher? Is it not kosher? That sort of thing. Back in the days, in the shtetl, not that long ago, they would bring the Cohen the chicken and shech the chicken and say, hey, was this shechted properly? Is it kosher? Today we buy it, in the packages. But back then you went to a Rav with actual, an actual chicken and said, hey, what's the status of this guy? So you have to be able to identify on the spot. The Cohen had to identify these lesions on the spot. All right, let's jump in. Reading number 3. If a person's flesh has an inflammation on its skin, okay? So the way I have it here in the good condition is it's an inflammation caused by an infection, okay? And it heals. And on the place of the inflammation, there is now a white se'et, which is a white blotch, or a reddish white baheret, which baheret here is translated as a spot. So we have a blotch and a spot. So either there was an infection, inflammation, and now there's a white blotch or a reddish white spot that appears to be streaked. Reddish white, kind of streaked, red and white together. So in those cases, it shall be shown to the Kohen. Again, don't go to the dermatologist or the doctor. This is something that only a Kohen can handle. The Kohen shall look at it, and behold, its appearance is lower than the skin. That means if. It's giving us a scenario. If its appearance is lower than the skin, it looks deeper, and its hair has turned white inside that area, so the Kohen shall pronounce him unclean. Those are the two signs, right? Some of the signs. It looks lower than the skin just based on the appearance. The hair has turned white inside that area. That is unclean. It is a confirmed lesion of tzarat that has erupted on the inflammation, right? This is not just on like normal skin. This is tzarat on an inflammation that's coming from an infection. Gewalt. But if the Kohen looks at it and behold, it does not contain white hair, nor does it appear to be lower than the skin, and it is dim. So it's like, I don't know. This is kind of, it looks pretty benign. So then the Kohen shall quarantine him for 7 days because he's still not sure. It's not obviously tzarat, so come back in 7 days. And if it spreads on the skin after those 7 days with the second examination, the Kohen shall pronounce him unclean. It is a lesion. If it gets bigger, then that's tzarat. But if the baheret remains in its place, that's the baheret was the reddish white spot, streaky spot. If it remains in its place, not spreading, then it is the scar tissue of the inflammation. Now Torah gets into medical conclusions, right? That's not tzarat. That's standard scar tissue from the inflammation. That's the result of the inflammation. That's an infection. That's normal. And the Kohen shall pronounce him clean. There you go. So now we know what happens in this case. It's fantastic. All right, let's pull up Rashi on this. Here we go. Inflammation. This term, shchin. Shchin, by the way, shchin, you know where we had that before? 10 plagues. The plague of boils was called shchin. So here we have it again, the same word. Shchin means infection. Denotes heat. That the flesh became heated by an injury caused by a blow, not by fire. So it's not actually fire, but it's an injury. Oh, interesting. It doesn't necessarily say infection here. It could be like a bruise, maybe. That's what it sounds like. Heated by the injury caused it by a blow. Okay. In the Good edition, it talks about an effect. It says infection in the parentheses. I'm not sure where he got that. Maybe in the Talmud Chulin 8a, maybe it clarifies there. All right, let's assume it's an infection because I'm sure they knew what they were talking about here. So the inflammation healed, and in its place, another lesion appeared. Right, so that's the old double whammy. So you start off with an infection, a skin issue, and then on top of that, now like, is this tzaras? Okay, And what happens? A reddish, there's either a white blotch or a reddish white beheret, meaning Rashi says that the lesion is not solid white, but streaked and blended of two colors, white and red. Honestly, that still sounds infected, but that's just me. Next, its appearance is lower than the skin, but its substance is not lower. Now, it's not actually lower, it's just based on visual appearance, it looks low. Rather, because of its whiteness, the lesion only appears lower and deeper than the skin, just as sunlight appears deeper than a shadow. There you go. Now you have an experiment, a field trip. Next time you go outside, take a look at the ground and find a shadow and light and see if the sun appears deeper than the shadow. It's an interesting visual description. Basically, when there's a white splotch on the skin, you look at the skin is a little bit darker. It's not like perfectly white, right? So then you look down and you see that it looks like the white, it almost looks like it's embossed, like a little bit deeper than the rest. That's a sign of tzarat. It is a lesion, Rashi said, the Torah says, Rashi explains, it's masculine, feminine, it's a grammar one. We're not going to do that one. Let's continue. Scar tissue. So if it doesn't spread, etc., then it's just scar tissue. That means Rashi's a residual impression of the inflammation, identifiable on the flesh, i.e. a scar. It's just a scar. It's white. Yeah, it's a scar. It is scar tissue. Shriveling. There's the skin. Right? When you get a scar, it's white. That's what a scar looks like. Okay, so it's not tzarat, it is a scar. All right, so that concludes the readings for today. We're going to stop right here. I think, look, we got a lot of technical information. The one insight that I wanted to share was about the Cohen and the role of the Cohen. And the takeaway message is, before we chastise, criticize, discipline, speak harshly, banish, whatever it is, let's make sure it's only coming from a place of love, and make sure that the other one knows that coming from a place of love. One of the greatest sources of harm is harshness that is perceived as just being harsh. It traumatizes kids and adults. No one's immune to this, right? Getting yelled at or shouted at or criticized, and you feel bad inside, and whatever it is, could all be avoided. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it could all be avoided if whoever's doing the criticizing, correction, disciplining, whatever, actually did it from a place of love. Then it wouldn't hurt. Just anecdotally, there's tons of videos of people coming to the Rabbi at various occasions. I mean, obviously weekdays when they could film, and asking advice and whatever it is, and or giving the Rebbe nachas and saying, hey, this is what I accomplished. This is what we did. And so many times the Rebbe would, push back and say, I think somebody once said, oh, we're pledging $1 million to, education, whatever it is. The Rebbe smiled and said, you expect me to be satisfied with $1 million? But it was a critique, but it came from a place of love, and it came from a belief that you could do better. It's not like, it's hard for me to explain. You know when somebody is actually disappointed and you feel bad and it hurts? The Rebbe wasn't like disappointed. The Rebbe was encouraging someone to reach in and pull something deeper out. Not only with money, with anything. A mitzvah, with learning, Torah study, whatever it was, always encouraging more. But from a positive place. Not guilt, not negativity, not judgment, not harshness, not anger, not nothing, not irritation, frustration. No, positivity. That's why the Rebbe could tell this person, like, you expect me to be happy with $1 million, and they're smiling, they're laughing, like everyone gets it, and they up the play, and I don't know exact story, but presumably they would say, you know what, you're right, let me give a little bit more. But it's done from a place of positivity and love. We get so much further in life when we do this. It's not just a strategy. It really should be organically part of who we are. And I think the other message is, if we're not a Cohen in this moment, then don't pronounce someone unclean. That's really what it is. Like, don't say the words unclean unless you are channeling your inner Cohen. Otherwise, wait, right? It's better to wait and do whatever it takes to get yourself in that space and then operate from there. The worst time to correct or discipline or whatever it is, to criticize, critique, maybe a better word, is when you're you're anxious, when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when something, that's the worst time. Wait, stay. Look, sometimes you can't wait. Child runs into the street, then you're like, you get their attention and get them to get out of the street. Obviously, sometimes you have to do correction on the spot, and you may raise your voice a little bit or whatever it is. But by and large, correction should happen from a place of love and positivity and a sense that that person feels like you believe in them. You believe in them maybe more than they believe in themselves. Then you'll get the results that you're looking for. But not only as a strategy. This is not just a hack. This is like, it's got to be genuine because people see through artificial stuff. Okay, any other thoughts or comments before we close it out for today? That's it. All right. Sounds good.
Rabbi, what if the Cohen does not have those innate traits?
Yeah. That's a problem. Cohen had to. They had to. What if they didn't?
Well, I mean, like I'm really
had to go back to Cohen school. They trained for years before they could serve.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Cohen was only allowed to serve, I want to say, 25, 30 years old. There was years of training.
Okay, I was thinking more, that makes sense. I'm thinking more, how are these attributes today, someone that's a Cohen, I'm saying it's more challenging.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah, not all, listen, I'm criticizing Cohen, but yeah, it's something that, and even then, you can't magically just like, oh, I'm a nice guy. But it would have to be something, a perspective, something to work on and something to feel and something to really embrace. So
it was a learned thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you can also develop that. There's an interesting story. There was one time a young woman wrote a letter to the Rebbe saying that she's concerned about getting married because she doesn't consider herself, because she's not a patient person. So what's going to happen? I'm going to get married. And, and then maybe I have children and I'm not a patient person. It's going to be a disaster. It's like, I feel bad for my husband and my future kids. Like, what are they going to do if I'm so impatient? So the Rebbe told her, I'm trying to remember what the advice was, but it was something about I want to say maybe even like being a waiter at your school, like serving food, or maybe serving food other places, volunteering somewhere, or volunteering to help, out in a school. I don't know. There was some sort of just start putting yourself in that position of helping and being generous of your spirit and your time. And that will help develop that trait of, love, giving, compassion, and patience within you. In other words, even if you're not predisposed, I think is the word, to that, even if that's not your natural inclination, but you can develop that with intentionality and with doing work in that area. So I found that to be interesting, even though I can't remember the exact details, but the concept I think is fascinating. Anyway, today, just because the person is last name Cohen doesn't necessarily mean, whatever. It's all choice. Every person is different. You can have a Cohen who might be a little bit harsh and a non-Cohen, right? Who could be very nice. So your mileage may vary, but this is a defining feature of what a Cohen at least ought to be, and what in turn we all ought to be as we are potentially pronouncing people impure, needing of being fixed or fixing or repair. If that's the pronouncement, make sure you're a Cohen first. Okay. All right. We'll see y'all. Tonight we have an incredible You Be the Judge class. Join us tonight at 8 p.m. Tomorrow at DPP, standard time. Wednesday night Torah studies. What do we have? Thursday regular DBP. I don't think there's anything Thursday night this week. And then stay tuned for more excitement next week. We have book club on Sunday and our CS Monday night, Rosh Hashanah Society, all about kindness, by the way. This month's theme for Rosh Hashanah Society, the women's class, is all about kindness and generosity, chesed, from a Jewish perspective. Okay, all right. That's all the public service announcements that are fit to print. We'll see y'all soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure. Bye, Sarah. Bye, Donna. Bye, Joy. Take care.